Earth the Marauder, beginning a three-part novel by Arthur J. Burks. Forward. Despite the fact that for centuries the secret of life had been the possession of children of men, the Earth was dying. She was dying because the warmth of the sun was fading, because with the obliteration of the oceans in order to find new land upon which man might live, her seasons had become stormy, unbearably cold and dreary. And the very fact of her knowledge of the secret of life, in which men numbered their ages by centuries instead of by years, was her undoing. For when men didn't die, they multiplied beyond all counting, beyond all possibility of securing permanent abiding places. One man, in the days when the earth was young, and man lived at best to the age of 70 years, could have, given time and opportunity, populated a nation. Now, when men lived for centuries, eternally youthful, their living descendants ran into incalculable numbers. The earth, strange paradox, was dying because it had learned the secret of life. 20 centuries before, the last war of aggression had been fought, in order that an overpopulated nation might find room in which to live. Now all the earth was one nation, speaking one tongue, and there were no more lands to conquer. Chapter 1. Sarka. In his laboratory atop the highest peak in the venerable Himalayas lived Sarka, conceded by the world to be its greatest scientist, despite his youth. His grandfather, who had watched the passing of 18 centuries, had discovered the secret of life, and thoughtlessly, in the light of later developments, broadcast his discovery to the world. The genius of this man, who was also called Sarka, had been passed on to his son, Sarka II, and by him in even greater degree to Sarka III, called merely Sarka for the purposes of this history. Had Sarka lived in the days before the discovery of the secret of life, people of that day would have judged him a young man of 20. His real age was 4 centuries. Behind him, as he sat moodily staring at the gigantic revolving barrel, stood a woman of most striking appearance. Her name was Jaska, and according to ideas of the days before the discovery, she seemed a trifle younger than Sarka. Her hand, unadorned by jewelry of any kind, rested on Sarka's shoulder, as he studied the revolving barrel, while her eyes, whose lashes matching her raven hair was like the wings of tiny blackbirds, noted afresh the wonder of this man. "What is to be done?" she asked him at last, and her voice was like music there in the room where science performed its miracles for Sarka. Wearily Sarka turned to face her, and she was struck anew, as she had been down the years since she had known this man. Every time their glances met, at the mighty curve of his brow, which rendered insignificant his mouth, his delicate nose of the twitching nostrils, the well deep eyes of him. "Something must be done," he said gloomily, "and that soon. For unless the children of men are provided with some manner of territorial expansion, they will destroy one another. Only the strongest will survive, and we shall return to the days when the waters covered the earth, and monstrous creatures bellowed from the primeval slime." "You are working on something?" she asked softly. For a moment he didn't answer. While she waited, Jaska peered into the depths of the revolving barrel, which represented the earth. It was 50 feet in diameter, and in its curved surface and entrancing depths was mirrored, in this latest development of teleview, all the earth and the doings of its people. but Jaska scarcely saw the fleeting images. The men locked in conflict for the right to live, the screaming, terror-stricken women. This was now a century-old story, and the civilization of Earth had almost reached the breaking point. No, she scarcely saw the things in the barrel, for she had read the hint of a vast, awesome secret in the eyes of Sarka, and wondered if he dared even tell her. "If the people knew," he whispered, "they would do one of two things. They would tear me limb from limb, and hurl the parts of me outward into space forever. Or they would demand that I move before I am ready, and cause a catastrophe which could never be rectified, and this grand old Earth of ours will be dead indeed. And this secret of yours?" Jaska now spoke in the sign language, which only these two knew, for there were billions of other evolving barrels in the world, and words could be heard by universal radio by any who cared to listen. And always, they knew, the legions of enemies of Sarka kept their ears open for words of Sarka, which could be twisted around to his undoing. "I shouldn't tell even you," he answered, his fingers working swiftly in their secret, silent language, which all the world could see, but which only these two understood. "For if my enemies knew that you possessed the information, there is nothing they would stop at to make you tell." "But I wouldn't tell, Sarka," she said softly. "You know that." He patted her hands, and the ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No," he said, "you wouldn't tell. Some day soon, and it must be soon if the children of men are not to destroy themselves, I will tell you. It's a secret that lies heavily on my heart. If I should make a mistake, chaos, catastrophe, eternal, perpetual dark, the children of men reduced to nothingness." A little gasp from Jaska, for it was plain that this thing Sarka hinted at was far and away beyond anything he had hitherto done, and Sarka had already performed miracles beyond any that had ever been done by his predecessors. "When my grandfather," went on Sarka moodily, "perfected in this self-same laboratory the machinery by which the waters of the oceans could be disintegrated, our enemies called him mad, and fought their way up these mountain slopes to destroy him. With the pack at his doors, he did as he had told them he would do, though they hurried swiftly into the great valleys to colonize them, where oceans had been. They were like ravening beasts, and gave my grandfather no thanks. Our people have always fought against progress, have always been disparaging of its advocates. When the first Sarka discovered the secret they would have destroyed him, though he made them immortal." "If only the secret," interrupted Jaska, "could be returned to him who discovered it, that would solve our problem, for men then would die and be buried, leaving their places for others." Again that weary smile on the face of Sarka. "Take back the secret which is known today to every son and daughter of woman? Impossible, more nearly impossible than the attainment of my most ambitious dream." "And that dream?" spoke Jaska with speeding fingers. "I have wondered about you," said Sarka softly, while those eyes of his bored deeply into hers. "We have been the best of friends, the best of comrades, but there are times when it comes to me that I don't know you entirely. And I have many enemies." "You mean," gasped the woman, for the moment forgetting the secret sign manual, "you think it possible that I might be one of your enemies in secret? Jaska, I don't know. But in this matter, in my mind, I trust no one. I am afraid even that people will read my very thoughts, though I have learned to so concentrate upon them that not the slightest hint of them shall go forth telepathically to my enemies. I don't mind death for myself, but our people must be saved. It's hideous to think that we have been given the secret of life, only to perish in the end because of it. I'm sorry, Jaska, but I can tell no one." But Jaska, one of the most beautiful and intelligent of Earth's beautiful and intelligent women, seemed not to be listening to Sarka at all. And when he had finished, she shrugged her shoulders slightly and prepared to leave. He followed her to the nearest exit dome, built solidly into the side of his laboratory, and watched her as she slipped swiftly into the white, skin-tight clothing, marked on breast and back with the red lily of the House of Cleric. His eyes still were deeply moody. He helped her don the gleaming metal helmet in whose skull pan was set the anti-gravitational ovoid, invented by Sarka II, used now of necessity by every human creature, and strode with her to the outer exit, a door of ponderous metal sufficiently strong to prevent the inner warmth of the laboratory getting out, or the biting cold of the heights to enter, and studied her still as she buckled about her hips her own personal Sarka belt, which automatically encased her, through contact with her tight clothing, with the warmth and balanced pressure of the laboratory, which would remain constant as long as she wore it. With a nod and a brief smile, she stepped to the metal door and vanished through it. Sarka turned gloomily back to his laboratory, looking into the depths of the revolving barrel, and adjusting the enlarging device which brought back life-size the infinitesimal individuals mirrored in the barrel. He watched her go, a trim white figure which flashed across the void, from mountain top to her valley home, like a very white projectile from another world. Very white and very precious, but when she was home and had waved to him that she had arrived safely, he forgot her for a time, and allowed his eyes to study the inner workings of this vast, crowded world, whose onrushing fate was so filling his brain with doubt, with fear, and something of horror. Chapter 2. The People of the Hives. Moodily Sarka stared into the depths of the barrel, which represented the Earth, and in which he could see everything that Earthlings did, after visually enlarging them, through use of a microscope that could be adjusted, with a relation to the barrel, to bring out in detail any section of the world he wished to study. His face was utterly sad. The people at last truly possessed the Earth, all of it that was, even with the aid of every miracle known to science, habitable. The surface of the Earth was one vast building, like a hive, and to each human being was allotted by law a certain abiding place. But men no longer died, unless they desired to do so, and then only when the spokesman of the Gens saw fit to grant permission. And there soon would be no place for the newborn to live. Even now, that point had practically been reached throughout the world, and in the greater portion it had been reached and passed, and men knew that while men didn't die, they could be killed. The vast building towering above what had once been the surface of the Earth, to heights undreamed of before the discovery, was irregular on its top, to fit the contour of the Earth, and its roof, constructed of materials raped from the Earth's core, was so designed as to catch and concentrate the early more feeble rays of the sun, so that its life-giving warmth might continue to be the boon of living people. It had been found as Earth cooled that life was possible to a depth of 8 miles below the one-time surface, so that the one huge building extended below the surface to this great depth, and was divided and redivided to make homes for men, their wives, and their progeny. But even so, space was limited. Neighboring families outgrew their surroundings, overflowed in the habitation of the neighbors, and every family was at constant war against its neighbors. Men didn't die, but they could be slain, and there was scarcely a home, above or below, in all the vast building, which hadn't planned and executed murder, times and times, or which hadn't left its own blood in the dwelling places of neighbors. No law could cope with this intolerable situation, for men down the ages had changed in their essential characteristics but little, and recognized one law only in their extremity, that of self-preservation. So there was murder rampant, and mothers who wept for children, husbands, fathers, or mothers who would never return to their homes. "My grandfather," whispered Sarka, his eyes peering deeply into a certain area beyond that assigned by law to the House of Cleric, where men of two neighboring families were locked in mortal, silent conflict, "shouldn't have frustrated the mad scheme of Dalis. It was slaughter, wholesale and terrible, but it would have cleansed the souls of the survivors." Mentally, Sarka was looking back now to that red day when Dalis, the closest scientific rival of Sarka the First, had come to Sarka the First with his proposal, which at the time had seemed so hideous. Sarka remembered that interval in all its details, for he had heard it many times. "Sarka," Dalis had said in his high-pitched voice, staring at Sarka the First out of red-rimmed fiery eyes, "unless something is done, the world will rush on to self-destruction. Men will slay one another. Fathers will kill their sons, and sons their fathers, if something is not done. For always there is marrying and giving in marriage, and each family is reaching out in all directions, seeking merely space in which to live. Formerly there were wars which automatically took thought of the hour-plus of man, but today the world is at peace, as men regard the term, and every man's hand is against his neighbor. There will be no more wars. When there should be, there is but one alternative." "And that?" Sarka the First had queried suspiciously. "The segregation of the fittest. The destruction, swiftly, painlessly, of all the others, and when the survivors had again repopulated the earth to overflowing, a repetition of the same corrective. Men will die, yes, by millions, but those who are left will be a stronger, sturdier race, and by this process of elimination, century by century, men will evolve and become Supermen. And this plan of yours?" For a moment Dalis had paused, breathing heavily, as though almost afraid to continue. Then, while Sarka the First had listened in frozen terror, Dalis had explained his ghastly scheme. "If it were not for the mountains and the valleys," said Dalis, "and the world were perfectly round and smooth of surface, that surface would be covered by water to the depth of 1 mile. Is that not correct? The Earth, rotating on its axis, travels about the Sun at the rate of something like 19 miles per second, so perfectly balanced that the oceans remain almost quiescent in their beds. But Sarka, mark me well, if we could together devise a way to halt this rotation for as much as a few seconds, what would happen?" "What would happen?" repeated Sarka the First, dropping his own voice to a husky, frightened whisper. "Why, the oceans would be hurled out of their beds, and a wall of water a mile high or more is all guesswork would rush eastward around the world, bearing everything before it. It would uproot and destroy buildings, sweep the rocky covering of the earth free of soil, and humanity, caught on the earth below the highest level of the world's greatest tidal wave, would be engulfed." "Exactly," Dalis had said with a grin. "Exactly. Only the people we wish to survive could be warned, and this could either be aloft when the tidal wave swept the face of the earth, or could be safely out of reach of the waters on the sides of the highest mountains." Sarka the First, wanly smiling, catching his breath at last, now that he realized the utter impossibility of this mad scheme, had been minded to humor the fancies of a man whom he had believed not quite sane. "Why not," he began, "take away from men the secret of life, so that they will die as formerly, when the world was young? When all the world knows the secret? When even children learn it before they are capable of walking?" demanded Dalis sarcastically. "You could only remove knowledge of the secret from the brains of men by removing those brains themselves. Your thought is more terrible even than mine, because it leads to the inescapable conclusion. But supposing for a moment your mad scheme were possible, we should say whom, of all the earth's people, should be saved, whom sacrificed? What better test could be given than that which I am proposing?" Dalis had snarled. "Those worthy of being saved would save themselves. Those who would perish wouldn't be worth saving. As natural, as inescapable as the law of the survival of the fittest, which has been an axiom of life since men first crawled out of the slime, and asked each other questions as they caught their first glimpses of the stars and pondered the reasons for them. But where, then, was there any point in my giving to people the secret of life?" "Have you paused to think," snapped Dalis, "you would never have done so. Your lust for power and for fame destroyed your foresight." "And is it not, Dalis," replied Sarka the First softly, "for this, really, that you have come to me, to berate me, to throw at my head mad schemes impossible of accomplishment? I have always known you for an enemy, Dalis, because you are envious of what I have accomplished, what you sense that I will accomplish as time passes." "I don't love you, Sarka," retorted Dalis frankly. "I despise you, hate you, but I need the aid of that keen brain of yours. You see, hate you though I may, I do you honor still. I have something up here," tapping the dome of his brow only less lofty than that of Sarka, "which you lack. You have something I haven't, never can attain. But together we are complements, each of the other, and to the two of us this scheme is possible." "I am very busy, Dalis," Sarka the First had replied coldly. "I must ask you to leave me. What you propose is impossible, unthinkable." "So," retorted Dalis, "you think me mad. You think me incapable of perfecting this plan about whose details you haven't even yet been informed. You would show me the door as though you were a king and I a slave, when kings and slaves vanished from the earth millenniums ago. Then listen to me, Sarka. I know how to do these things about which I have told you. I can hold, for a brief moment only, the whirl of the earth about its axis, and by so doing I can flood the earth with the waters of the oceans. If you will not listen to me, I shall do it myself. You shall have 2 days in which to give me an answer, for I admit that I need you, who would balance me, make sure I made no fatal mistakes. But if you don't, I will act along the lines I have hinted." apparently as unconcerned as though he hadn't just listened to a scheme for almost total depopulation of the world, the destruction of millions upon millions of lives. Sarka the First had dismissed Dalis, who had straightway used all his offices to arouse the world of science against the first Sarka. But when the 2 days of grace given by Dalis had passed, there were no oceans, for Sarka the First had been planning for a century against the time when the earth must of necessity be overpopulated, and had worked and slaved in his laboratory against the contingency which had developed. He had smiled, though there was a trace of fear on his face after Dalis had left, for his scheme had been worked out, not to destroy, but to save. And from this same laboratory in which Sarka now sat and pondered on the next step in man's expansion, Sarka the First had, in fear and trembling at first, but with his confidence growing by leaps and bounds, worked his own miracle, untold millions and billions of rays, whose any portion of which, coming in contact with water, immediately separated its hydrogen and oxygen, thus disintegrating its molecules, were hurled forth from their storehouses beneath the laboratory, across the faces of the mighty oceans of earth. And when men saw the miracle, they rushed into the mighty valleys where the oceans had been, and began to build new homes. That had been centuries ago, scores of centuries. Now all the earth, all the livable part of the earth above its surface, and below it to the depths of miles, was filled with people, like bees in a monster hive, like ants of antiquity in their warrened hills, and there was no place now that they could go. So they fought amongst themselves for the right to live. "But my grandfather was right!" Sarka almost screamed it, speaking aloud in the silence of his laboratory. "My grandfather was right. Dalis was wrong. Science should be the science of life, not of death. Whither shall we go? Where now shall we find places for our people who are daily being born in myriads, to live and love and flourish?" But there was no answer, only the humming of the perpetually revolving barrel, which showed to the sad eyes of Sarka that the people of his beloved Earth were rushing onward to chaos, unless... "If only I could be sure about Jaska," he moaned. "If only my courage were as great as that of which I stand in need. For if I fail, even Dalis, had he succeeded with that scheme of his in grandfather's time, would be less a monster, less a criminal." Chapter 3. The Spokesman of the Gens. For a long moment Sarka looked broodingly out across the world beyond the metallized glass, which formed the curving dome of his laboratory roof. There was little that could be seen, for always the mighty cold winds, roughed with flurries of snow and particles of ice, swept over this artificial roof of the world. Here and there huge portions of the area within the range of his normal vision were swept clear and clean of snow and ice, and looked bluely, bitterly cold and hostile. Without the Sarka belts, people who ventured forth from their hives would instantly freeze to the consistency of marble in those winds and storms, for the people of Earth had built their monster habitation toward the stars until they reached up into the altitude of perpetual cold. Only under that gleaming roof was there warmth. Many of the men and women and children who had lost in their now century-old fight for survival had merely been tossed out of their hives. A painless, swift death, but each death, in a word so highly specialized that each grown person fitted into his niche naturally and easily, was a distinct loss, not much perhaps, but enough for the loss to be felt. Sarka, closing his eyes for a moment as though to shut out a horror which in his mind he could visualize, turned back to the revolving barrel, in which he kept in constant touch with all parts of the world at will. "It must be done," he muttered. "I must take action. It means the loss of thousands, perhaps millions of lives, in such a war as the mind of man hasn't hitherto conceived, but for a cause greater than any which has ever hitherto been an excuse for armed conflict. But I must discuss it with the spokesman of the Gens." On the table before Sarka was a row of vari-colored lights, whose source was beneath the floor of the laboratory, out of the heart of the Master Mountain, part of the intricate machinery of this laboratory which had been almost 20 centuries in the perfecting. In the dwelling place of each of the spokesmen was a single light, colored like one of the lights on Sarka's table. To speak with any one of the spokesmen, Sarka had but to dim the properly colored light by covering it with the palm of his hand. The light in the home of the thus signaled spokesman was dimmed, and the spokesman would know that Sarka desired to converse with him. Sarka noted the blue light, and shuddered. For if he covered it with his palm it would summon Dalis, a great scientist, but an erratic one, as Sarka the First had so clearly shown. Sarka turned again to the Beryl. The area of which Dalis was spokesman was, roughly speaking, that part of what had once been the Pacific Ocean, north of a line drawn east and west through the southernmost of the Hawaiian Islands, northward to the Pole. The home of Dalis was in the heart of what had once been an island historians claimed had been called Wahoo, now a mountain peak still retaining a hint of the pre-discovery name Ohi. The total number of the spokesmen, the oldest of Earth's inhabitants, was 12, and the remainder of the Earth not under the tutelary rule of Dalis was divided up among the other 11 spokesmen. Cleric, for example, father of Jaska, was spokesman of that area which men had once called Asia, the vast valleys of the once Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean, while the youngest of the spokesmen, in a manner serving his apprenticeship, was tutelary head of the vast plateau once called Africa. The name of this man was Gerd. He, at least, thought Sarka, thinking of each spokesman in turn and cataloguing each in his mind, will be with me. I wonder about the others, and especially Dalis. He has always hated us. Then, with the air of a man who has made up his mind and crosses his particular Rubicon in a single step, Sarka rose to his feet and passed along the row of vari-colored lights, covering each one with his hand in rapid succession. Then he sat down again, almost holding his breath, and waited. As he stared at the row of lights, his eyes lingered longest on two which were almost golden in color, and his face was very gentle, almost reverent, for those two lights were signals to Sarka the First and Sarka the Second, his grandfather and his father. It was Dalis, the irascible, the fiery-tempered, the erratic, who first made answer. "Yes, what is it now?" Sarka smiled a trifle grimly as he spoke a single word. "Wait." The voice of Dalis, which Sarka had good cause to remember, had sounded as loudly in the laboratory as though Dalis had been present there in person, for man had learned to communicate by voice almost without the aid of radio and its appurtenances, though the principle upon which the first crude beginnings of radio were fashioned still applied. Each man's dwelling place was both a sender and a receiver, and men could talk and be talked to no matter where they lived. Individuals telepathically summoned at desire of anyone wishing verbal contact. "Gerd is here," came the voice of that spokesman. To him also Sarka spoke one word. "Wait." "I'm here, Sarka," came a musical voice, "and Jaska is with me, listening." That would be Cleric, loyal friend, master scientist, but always shy of contact with people, though swift to anger and self-forgetfulness when he knew himself right and was opposed. Sarka darted a look back at the revolving barrel, adjusted swiftly the barrel microscope, and smiled into the faces of Jaska and Cleric, who looked enough alike that they might have been brother and sister, Though Cleric had been born 10 centuries before his daughter Jaska, they smiled back at him. He shifted the barrel microscope and stared for a second at Dalis, there in the barrel, and marked the antagonism Dalis was at no pains to hide. One by one the spokesmen reported. Clazer from the Americas, Durst from the valleys of the vanished Atlantic, Bowler from that part of the Arctic Circle not included in the wedge which the Gens of Dalis thrust northward to the pole, Vardee, Prul, Utah, Eal, Vance, and Haim, each from his appointed area, each from the official headquarters of his Gens, the name given to those people who acknowledged the tutelage of a spokesman. Each spokesman, therefore, was the mouthpiece of millions of men, women, and children. And over the spokesmen, and not themselves spokesmen, were 3 scientists, the Sarkas first, second, and third. When all 12 of the spokesmen had reported and been bidden by Sarka to wait, a smile touched the face of Sarka for an instant as 2 other voices so nearly alike they might have been the voice of a single person reported themselves. "I'm here, son. What is it?" Oddly enough, Sarka's father and grandfather reported with exactly the same words. Sarka smiled at a whimsical thought of his own. It had been some time since the 3 scientist Sarkas had been together, and despite the vast differences in their ages, they might have been triplets. The reports were in and the spokesmen were waiting, but for almost a minute Sarka waited still. Then he spoke swiftly those words for which there could be no recall. "Gentlemen, the time has come when we must go to war." For a long moment after he had spoken there was no answer. Then it came, and the jeering laughter of the antagonistic Dalis. "War? Against whom? The Sarkas are always dreaming." "And Dalis," continued Sarka, "shall be one of the leaders of Earthlings in this war which I am about to propose. You doubtless recall a proposal you once made to Sarka the First? Your proposal to halt for a few moments the headlong whirl of the Earth about its axis, thus to flood—" "Stop!" interrupted Dalis. "Stop immediately!" And Sarka stopped. He had forgotten, in the excitement of his urge to explain his plans, that the millions of people who have official allegiance to Dalis had never been informed of the hideous proposal he had made, back there centuries ago, as a corrective for a world rapidly approaching overpopulation. Had his people known, never again would the voice of Dalis be heard in life. The spokesman knew, and the Sarkas, but no others. Sarka understood the protest of Dalis, honored it. "Dalis," he went on more softly, "after I have explained what I wish to do, you will come to me here, prepared to explain to me exactly how you plan doing what you proposed to my grandfather, for your knowledge will be necessary to me. Isn't it enough that your grandfather stole from me and amplified an idea that would have made me forever famous, without his grandson also stealing the fruit of my brains?" "Your brains," said Sarka sharply, "belong to your people. What I plan is for their betterment. But it means war, war which may last a century, 2 centuries, in which lives of countless thousands may be lost." Sarka's last words were almost drowned out by the humming sound that came out of the rolling barrel, that perfected device which was the ultimate in the evolution of television and vibration transference. Sarka's heart sank, for he knew the meaning of that sound. So did the spokesman. "You see?" came the rasping voice of Dalis. "You hear? Look into your barrel. See the clenched fists of the Earth's myriads being shaken at you. Listen to the protests of millions who hear your every word. See what Earthlings think of the prospect of war." For a moment Sarka spoke directly to the people. "Be silent and listen. It will be war, yes, but not such a skulking, hideous war as you wage among yourselves for a place to live. You, fathers, are guilty of slaying your sons, you sons of slaying your fathers, merely by thrusting them forth from their hives into the outer cold. This war I propose shall be a war that shall match your manhood, if you indeed be men. Listen to me, and I will find for you new lands to conquer, new homes for your holding, if you can take them." "But where," interrupted the sarcastic voice of Dalis, "are these new lands of which you speak? Inside the earth? Already our hives reach into the earth at a distance of 8 miles. Where else, then?" "For shame, Dalis," snapped Sarka. "And you a scientist! Every bit of habitable land on this globe is some man's dwelling place. Spokesman of the Gens of Earth, look out your windows, look out and upward, and read Dalis' answer in the stars." For a full minute there was silence throughout the earth, and Sarka saw that the spokesmen were doing his bidding. He himself looked out through the swirling storm which tore at the crest of Himalayas, a dark and forbidding outside, in the starred dome of which rode the pale orbed moon. "It's obvious, son," came the voice of Sarka the First. "What you mean, but how accomplish it?" "15 centuries ago, my father's father," cried Sarka, "Dalis told you that he possessed the power to hold for a moment the headlong world of the world on its axis, about the sun. He could do it then, and no man, whatever he may think of Dalis as a man, has ever known him to lie. If 15 centuries ago he could bring the world in one to pause, why can we not now?" And even though he had thought of this for years upon end, had spoken over and over to himself the words he was now using, rehearsing his proposed argument to the spokesmen of the Gens, Sarka found himself for a moment almost afraid to continue and speak them. "I understand, Sarka," came the excited voice of Gerd, youngest of the spokesmen, "and I follow wherever you think it best to lead. You mean... "Exactly," Sarka managed at last. "If the Earth can be stayed on its axis, it can be diverted from its orbit entirely. I know, for I have found the manner of its doing, though I need the genius of Dalis to check my work and my calculations. We have no new land on this Earth to conquer, but the universe is filled with countless other worlds. What say you, spokesmen of the Gens? What say you, Gens of Earth?" But for the time of 1,000 heartbeats, neither the spokesmen or the Gens made answer to Sarka, and all the world fell utterly silent, absorbing this unbelievable thing of which Sarka had hinted. Over the metallized roof of the world the snows and storms, the winds and the wraiths of the long dead, moaned and screamed as with an icy voice of abysmal warning. And for the time of those 1,000 heartbeats, the world was pausing to listen. When realization came, the answer would come from the spokesman and from the Gens, and here in the Sarka laboratory, his Rubicon crossed at last, said Sarka, staring through the barrel microscope into the depths over the revolving barrel. His face was dead white. His eyes narrowed. The first voice which came startled him. "It's mad, Sarka, mad, mad, but I am with you always." It was the voice of Jaska, daughter of Cleric. Chapter 4. The Earthlings Make Ready. "I too am with you," came the voice of Gerd. "Spoken like a child," snapped Dalis. "For you are as much a child as this third of the dreaming Sarkas. The scheme is mad, madder even than Jaska intimates. The scheme I once proposed, in which I was cheated by the grandfather of this madman, was times and times more feasible and practicable." "Suppose," came the soft voice of Sarka the First, interrupting Dalis, "that you put the matter up to your Gens, O wise and noble Dalis, and see which scheme they would endorse if given the choice in the matter, and were your scheme still possible." This quickly silenced the vituperation of Dalis, but in no wise prevented his continuance as a rather loud antagonist of the plan. "How," he demanded, "can you return the Earth to its orbit, even granting you are able to take this initial step? How keep life on the Earth during its flight on this rainbow-chasing voyage you propose?" "All these things have been taken into consideration, O Dalis," retorted Sarka. "All of my scheme is practicable, as I think you will agree when I have told you its details. What think you of the plan, Klaser? And you, Dos, Boller, Vardey, Prul, Utah, Eyal, Vance, Haim?" When the spokesmen had answered, some of them hesitantly, for the people all this time had remained silent, and none of the spokesmen could be sure how his own Gens would feel in the matter, it developed that 7 of the spokesmen were for the scheme, if it should prove to be possible. "If this is the voice of the majority of the Gens," snapped Dalis, "given thus by their spokesman, then I vote with the majority. I shall call upon you immediately, Sarka, for a conference." "I am glad," said Sarka softly, "that the majority of the spokesmen are with me. Especially am I glad that Dalis and Cleric vote with me. For the others I have only this to say. I have thought this matter over for almost a century, and I know that the time has come when we must act, to save ourselves from self-destruction. Had you not decided with me, I should have acted alone." "Yes?" snapped Dalis. "How?" "I have here in my laboratory," replied Sarka, "the power whereby to accomplish the scheme of which I have told you. Had all the Gens defied me, I would have nevertheless sent the Earth outward on its voyage, bringing it within reach of the denizens, first of the Moon, second of Mars, and you people of little courage would have been compelled to fight to save yourselves." "You would have forced us into war?" came the quavering voice of Prul, the first spokesman aside from Dalis to take active part in the discussion. "Then why, if you had the means in the beginning to enforce your will upon us, confer with us at all?" Sarka thrilled with satisfaction, for this question gave him the excuse he sought. He had been wondering and scheming how to compel the spokesmen of the Gens to obey his will. "I wanted your opinions," he said shortly, "but I also wish you to know that I have the power to go on, whether you wish it or not, and you must obey me." How would the 12 Gens take this ultimatum of Sarka? For breathless moments after he had spoken he waited, and the spokesman with him. Then came the voice of Cleric, addressing his people, yet leaving the context open so that Sarka and the other spokesmen might hear. "What say you, O Gens of Cleric?" he cried, his voice an exultant, clarioning paean of rejoicing. "Do we follow this man who promises us life again? Do we follow this man who promises us that once again we shall dwell in plenty, without the blood of relatives and neighbors on our hands? Answer this man, O Gens, for I say unto you that wheresoever he leads I would follow him." Silence for a heartbeat. Then a murmuring like the sound of the waves of the long vanished sea sounded in the laboratory, wherein all things were seen, all sounds were heard. A monster voice, loud and savage, from the Gens of Cleric. "We follow Cleric wherever he leads." Finally the words became intelligible. "It matters not to us whom Cleric follows, so long as we may follow Cleric." "Well spoken, O Gens of Cleric!" snapped Sarka when the murmuring died down to a whisper, then faded out entirely. "Deck yourselves in the white garments of Cleric, emblazon upon your backs and breast the red lily of his house. Prepare for war. These are your orders. The details I leave to Cleric." There came the voice Dalis. "Give your orders to my Gens direct, O Sarka," rasped Dalis, "for I live this very moment to come to you." "Thank you," said Sarka, a great wave of exultation sweeping over him. He had expected Dalis to be the last and most difficult to manage. Then to the Gens of Dalis, as the blue light on the table in the laboratory showed Sarka that Dalis was already winning toward him. "Deck yourselves in the green garments of Dalis. Wear as you insigne the yellow star of his house, and prepare for war. Make new and modern ray directors. Refurbish your rotting machines of destruction. Make ready and make haste. For the Gens of Dalis will be the first of all the Gens to move an attack against the dwellers outside. When the time comes I shall tell you where you shall dwell. If you win the land I shall show you." The humming of myriad voices inside the laboratory was now almost continuous. But ever the words of Sarka went out to the spokesman and to the Gens, though, save in the case of Cleric and of Dalis, he didn't speak to the Gens direct, because he didn't wish in one iota to usurp the authority of spokesmen themselves. But when less than an hour had passed, he realized that the first step had been successfully taken, and that from now on the success or failure of the scheme rested in his own hands. Perspiration bedewed his forehead, and for a second he prayed. God of our fathers, grant that we be not mistaken, grant that we be right in what we plan, grant that success attend our arms, grant that this scheme of mine lead us not to catastrophe, for if this should develop, only I am guilty, and only I should be punished. Amen. As one voice the spokesman of the Gens spoke the word, and Sarka heard it. He had forgotten for the moment that the spokesman still could hear him. "That is all," he said huskily. "Prepare your Gens, each of you, for such battle as even our histories never have recorded. For we go against foemen whose strength we don't know, whose manner of life we don't know, and we must not fail. Make haste with your preparations. Your time is short. And spokesmen, counsel your Gens that they put aside at once all personal differences, all family quarrels and quarrels with their neighbors, that each adult individual, each unmarried woman, and such married women as have all their children grown, and who no longer need them, prepare to go forth to battle. From this laboratory, within a brief space, Dalis and the Sarkas will give you a further word." Then he dimmed the lights, and severed contact with the spokesman of the Gens. Only two lights he didn't dim, at the moment, and to two men he spoke softly. "My father and my father's father, come to me at once, for there shall be need of the combined genius of the Sarkas if my scheme is to succeed." From both Sarkas, as though they had rehearsed the words against this need of them, came answer: "Aye, son, we come." From that moment on until Dalis and the Sarkas were ready to take the most momentous step ever taken in the history of the world, the humming within the laboratory didn't cease. For the people, the millions and billions of people of the hives, were busy, eagerly and feverishly busy, preparing new armament, new engines of destruction, against the time when there should be need of them. And for perhaps the first time in centuries, the people were happy. For not even the passage of 1,000 centuries, of 1,000 centuries, could flush from the warm hearts of men the love of conflict. Sarka smiled wanly, his face very pale. He had spoken, his people were busy with preparations, and now there could be no turning back. The world, when he spoke the word, would rush outward to glorious conflict, or to destruction. A buzzer sounded near the exit dome. Sarka raced to give the enter signal, and Dalis, he of the hawk eyes, the sharp nose and sharper tongue, entered the presence of that man who, in a twinkling, had made himself master of the world. "Well," he said harshly, "I am here. What do you wish of me?" "We Sarkas," said Sarka easily, "wish to assure ourselves that you will do nothing to obstruct our plans. Dalis of the Gens of Dalis, you are prisoner of the Sarkas until you have passed your word." "That I will never do," said Dalis calmly. "I have passed my word to go forward with you, but I meant, and you knew I meant, to go forward only as far as to me seemed right and reasonable." Chapter 5. The Betrayal of Dalis. And until the arrival of the other two Sarkas, Dalis said nothing. His face flushed an angry red as Sarka the First received the enter signal, and stepped into the laboratory which had once been his, which he had delivered into the capable hands of Sarka the Second, in order to find new channels for his genius as a worker for the betterment of the world's people. This he had found in organization, so that the people worked and labored despite their personal quarrels in closer harmony than they ever had before. But now Sarka the Third had called, and the two Sarkas responded. Dalis snarled at his ancient enemy, who looked to be the image of Sarka the Third, and not one whit older. though one had preceded the other into the world by many centuries. "Still the pleasant, congenial Dalis, I see," smiled Sarka the First. For the moment it seemed that Dalis would die there of his seething anger. But he answered no word for all of a minute. Then, "This mad grandson of yours has made me a prisoner, until such time as I concur in all his plans." "If he says you are a prisoner, that you are," snapped the elder Sarka angrily. "Son, what is this thing you plan?" "For almost a century," replied Sarka, "I've been planning this. I knew, when father told me that Dalis had sworn he was able to hold for a moment the headlong flight of the Earth in its orbit, that Dalis didn't lie or bluff. In your day, even, that was possible, and I continued with the knotty problem until I deduced the manner of its doing. I too can halt the Earth's rotation, or throw it out of its orbit. I took your idea, Dalis, independently of you, knowing you would never reveal your secret to a Sarka, and amplified it until I can not only halt the Earth in its orbit, but throw it out of its orbit entirely." For a moment Sarka studied the angry face of Dalis, and his own was very thoughtful. "Dalis," he said at last, "I wish you were not our enemy, for you are a genius, and the world has need of all the knowledge of such genius as it possesses. Why do you oppose us?" "Because," snarled Dalis, "I guess something of your plan that I don't like. I don't like the Sarkas, never have. But neither have the Sarkas any love for me. When you spoke to us all, I knew that somehow you had discovered the secret. You spoke, when you delivered your ultimatum, of attacking the Moon and after it Mars. You also granted to my Gens what would have seemed a great honor to anyone who didn't fathom the tricky scheming of Sarkas, that of being the first into the fray. If we are to be first, and the Moon is to be the first attacked, then you plan to relieve the world forever of me, your arch enemy, by exiling me and all my Gens upon the Moon, a dead world covered with ashes, whose people dwell in dank caverns, like gnomes of the underworld." "Stay!" snapped Sarka. "But I granted you a greater honor even than that, Dalis. I planned on your Gens, led by you, making a successful conquest of the Moon, because only such a genius as Dalis could force from this dead world a living for his Gens. Because you are the wisest of the spokesmen, I planned for you the greatest task. Because I need you, I don't slay you." "I thank you," bowing low with the deepest sarcasm, "but you honor me too much. And tell me, pray, if it's not true that you plan for the Sarkas their choice of the best and newest worlds of the universe?" Sarka didn't answer for a second, while his sensitive nostrils quivered with fury. The Sarkas hadn't noticed, but Jaska, daughter of Cleric, had admitted herself through the exit dome in a way known only to Sarka and to herself, as she had entered many times before so as not to disturb Sarka at his labors. She now stood silently there, divesting herself of her belt and outer clothing, beneath which was the golden toga worn by all the women of the earth. Dalis, however, had seen her, and his eyes narrowed craftily as he awaited the answer of Sarka. "Dalis," said Sarka softly, "it's not for you to question me, but to obey me. I haven't undertaken this step without mastering all its details, and I refuse to allow you to swerve me in a single one of them from my plan." Dalis straightened, standing stiffly at savage attention, and met the angry eyes of Sarka without flinching. There was no fear in Dalis, as all the world knew, but he was a schemer and selfish. "After all," he said, "I have known Sarkas to make promises they couldn't keep. How do I know, how does the world know, that you can do what you say you can do?" "If," said Sarka, "I close all contact of this laboratory with the world outside, so that none may hear what I say save we four, and I then whisper here the secret you never told Dalis, when my father's father refused to help you, will you then believe?" The face of Dalis went suddenly white, but he nodded, his eyes burning redly. Jaska moved closer to the man, who stood near the table of the vari-colored lights. "You needed my father's father," said Sarka softly, "because the secret of your scheme rested here in this laboratory, which is the highest point in the world. You pretended to need him in your scheme, but you didn't need my father's father, though you did need his laboratory, and some of the facts of science that he discovered. So you came to him with your scheme, discovered that he believed, though he denied it, your scheme was possible, because he refused to aid you in it. Then, as an excuse to re-enter this laboratory, you told him you would return within 2 days. Now, shall I tell you your secret?" The lips of Dalis was moving soundlessly. His right hand started to rise, as though he would make it signal the negative. He was unable for a moment to speak. But even as he stood there, swaying slightly on his feet, Sarka dashed to the lights on the table, disconnecting them one by one, to the revolving barrel, which then ceased to revolve for the first time in centuries, whirled when he had finished, and stepped to the very center of the room. "Now," he whispered, "your secret, Dalis." Still the hand upraised. Still Dalis tried to speak, and couldn't. Sarka spoke, in a hoarse, almost terrified whisper, 4 words. "The barrel! The ovoids!" Gasp of surprise from the other 2 Sarkas, whose eyes for a second flashed to the huge barrel, which now was still, silent, and blind. Dawning comprehension was evident in their faces. "The success of the revolving barrel," whispered Sarka, "which sees all that transpires in this world, depends on one fact, that its revolving is proportionately timed, to infinite exactness with the revolution of the Earth about its axis. This barrel is the master barrel of the Earth, which was why Dalis needed this barrel, and could use no other. Suppose that for a period of 2 days, uniformly progressive, this barrel were forced to revolve in sharp jerks at an increasing rate of speed, with all connections in place, and all the world's barrel attuned to the speed of this one, what would happen? What would happen if a single Gens were marshaled in warlike array atop the area of the Gens, and kept up a steady, rhythmic march for a period of hours? "In a few hours," whispered Sarka the First, "the roof of the Gens area would begin to vibrate throughout all the area, and even into all surrounding Gens areas, and in time the roof would collapse." "Exactly," said Sarka, breathing heavily. "This barrel, when attuned to all other barrels in the world, would have this vibratory effect, not only in a certain area of the world, but upon the entire world. Force the speed of the barrels to the uttermost limit, and you sway the world to your will, as a marching horde would sway the roof of a vast section of the world if the horde's commander willed. But that is not enough. The world would tremble, but nothing more. The Earth's store of Ovidum, which is anti-gravitational and used in minute quantities in our anti-gravitational ovoids, is evenly distributed throughout the world. By vibration of the barrels, I can control it, scatter it or gather it all together wherever I will. By shifting through vibration this anti-gravitational material, I can disrupt, make uneven, or nullify the pull of gravity on the Earth." "That would do it," said Dalis, finding his voice at last. "But how would you control the course the Earth would take, thus thrown out of its orbit?" "That, my dear Dalis, is for the moment my secret." "But is it?" Dalis suddenly shouted. Before the 3 Sarkas could recover from their surprise at the man's sudden vehemence, he made a swift, terrifying move. He leaped away from them to stand beside Jaska, daughter of Cleric. "Sarka," he shrieked, "I know you love this woman. Know this little tube I hold against her side. With it I can cause her to vanish for all time, merely by a slight pressure of the fingers. And that will I do, unless you immediately open all contacts with the world and remain silent while I tell the people of Earth how you would betray them." The three Sarkas were petrified with amazement and horror, for they recognized the slender tube in the hand of Dalis as a Ray Director, the world's greatest engine of destruction, and knew that it would do exactly as Dalis had said it would. Automatically, because they were brave men, they had stepped a trifle closer to Jaska and Dalis. Perspiration poured from their cheeks as they stared at this rebel. But their fears were for Jaska, who now spoke for the first time. "Let him do as he wills," she said smilingly, "since for the good of the world I don't fear to die. Refuse him, Sarka, and I know that I go into death's darkness loving you always, and knowing that you will succeed in the end, in spite of the opposition of men like Dalis." A man of unexpected actions, this Dalis. For a while the attentions of the Sarkas were on the little tableau he had staged. His eyes had darted to the barrel, to the control which Sarka had touched to still its revolving. Now he sprang away from Jaska, was free of her, and the Sarkas before any could move to intercept him. He dashed to the barrel. Instantly it swept into motion, while Dalis whirled to face the Sarkas, and from his lips came a burst of triumphant laughter. One hand was on the barrel control, the other still held the Ray Director. "Fools!" he cried. "Fools! Duped like children! And now it's Dalis who is master of the world. Move closer to me, and I will turn my Ray Director upon this barrel, which you have so kindly informed me is master of all the barrels and of all Overdom deposits. Be glad that I don't turn it upon you. But for you I have a kinder, more honorable fate. I now am master, and I will direct the destiny of the world, but I will never leave it, because I suspect that it is the most pleasant of all the worlds. I will, however, choose for the Sarkas a world that shall be the dreariest in all the universe." The Sarkas whirled as soft laughter came from Jaska, daughter of Cleric. Strange, lilting laughter. They turned in time to see her vanish through the exit dome, but for a long moment her jeering laughter seemed to sound in the laboratory she had left, and to judge by her laughter, had betrayed. For Dalis, arch traitor, echoed her laughter. Chapter 6. The Barrels in Tune. "Remember," said Dalis, as the barrel began to revolve and its humming mounted moment by moment to normal, "that you must conquer in whatever I say to the people of the earth. For if you don't, I swear that I will destroy this master barrel." "Then what happens to your scheme, Sarka the Third?" "You see, there is no change in the plans," said one. "I am the master, not you." Dalis wasn't a madman, for the world considered him placed in its list of geniuses next below the three Sarkas, which was high honor indeed. But Dalis possessed in abundance that most universal of all human emotions, jealousy. For centuries he had been nursing it, watching the Sarkas always in the niches just above him, yet never been able to attain to their eminence. Now he had outwitted them. It might be for a moment only, but while his mastery lasted he would drink deeply of personal satisfaction. Now, however, there was no gloating in his face, for he realized, as Sarka had realized, the infinite gravity of the whole situation. If a mistake were made, the world would plunge to destruction, go cooling forever in headlong race through space. "Keep the Ray Director hidden," he whispered, while the murmuring of the master barrel mounted as it gained speed again. "But know you, Sarkas, that its muzzles points at the master barrel, always." Now the forms of Earth were appearing on the barrel. Many in countless horrors were maneuvering in myriads, legions and armies, across the face of the globe. There was no marching, but an effortless, swift, as light almost aerial maneuvering, for each human being possessed the tight-fitting metallized cloth, with a gleaming helmet, in whose skull pan was the anti-gravitational ovoid, which was the outside garment of Earthlings. With the ovoid sitting exactly against the skull, man had but to wheel himself in any direction at any livable height, and the action took place. In the same way, one man, to whom others in an organization gave allegiance by appointment, could will all his underlings into whatever formation he desired, as beautiful and effortless as the flight of those birds which had vanished from the earth centuries before. "Remember, Dalis," said Sarka, "that while the speed of the earth in its orbit is between 18 and 19 miles per second, once thrown out of its orbit and forced to follow a straight or nearly straight line, the speed may be many times that, or much less." "The simplest facts of science," snarled Dalis, "were known to me 1,000 years before you were born. Now I shall tell the Spokesman of the Gens, and be sure that you second what I say." He paused, then raising his voice impressively, he spoke. "O Spokesmen of the Gens! O Gens of Earth! Hark you to the words of Dalis and of Sarka! The time has come to try the experiment of which Sarka told you, and which I, Dalis, of the Gens of Dalis, have found good and hereby certify. See that all your barrels are mathematically tuned to catch every sound, every vibration, every picture from this barrel of Sarka, henceforth to be known as the Master Barrel. No matter what happens, no matter what changes take place in the temperature of your homes, no matter what storms may come, touch not your barrels until instructed from this laboratory. Tune your barrels, then leave them, and hasten faster with their preparations for war. Each spokesman of a gens will at once instruct the members of his gens that all partitions between families shall immediately be removed, outward from a common center in each case, until 100 families occupy a single dwelling place. Materials from destroyed partitions shall be carefully hoarded, and the newer and bigger areas shall become maneuvering places for the 100 families which will occupy each given area. Facing a crisis as we are, no thought can be given to privacy, and neighborly quarrels must be forgotten. This move is necessary because no single dwelling place is large enough to be used as a place of maneuver, and from now on until the command is given, maneuvers must not be held outside. For hark you, O spokesmen, O gens of Earth, we are about to start upon our voyage into outer space. Spokesmen, call in your maneuvering myriads. You have 5 minutes. In 5 minutes not a flying man could be seen in all the cold, stormy outside. Dalis spoke again. Tune your barrels and remove partitions, taking care that in reducing partitions you so estimate your stresses and strains that the roof of the world be not endangered by weight that is unsupported, or improperly supported. Food conservers, redouble your production and rush your transportation of food capsules. Mothers of men, take over the labors of your sons and your husbands. Sisters and sweethearts of men, join the myriads in maneuvers, for you too may require knowledge of fighting. In spite of himself, an ejaculation of admiration escaped the lips of Sarka. Hearing it, Dalis turned to him, and a flush of pleasure tinged his cheeks as Sarka shaped one word with his lips. "Excellent." Then after a pause, Sarka spoke directly to the gens of Earth. "Take heed of the words of Dalis, for they are also the words of the Sarkas." Then an expression of surprise flashed across the face of Sarka, as Dalis' fingers began to move in a swift sort of pantomime. For the sign manual he used was the secret manual of Jaska and Sarka. His heart cold within him at this new proof of his betrayal, Sarka nevertheless noted the words which dropped silently off the fingers of this enemy of the Sarkas. "You are wise to resist no further. Together we can do much. And if you give your word not to oppose me, we can work together. But I will be the master. But if we grant you the mastery, will you heed our advice if it's good?" "I will. But I alone will be the judge of its worth." "Then we work together henceforth. Let us begin. In the time required to move from here to the Moon, our people will have ample opportunity to perfect themselves in maneuvers. Are you ready, O my father and father's father?" "Ready," they said together. But for a moment Dalis hesitated. "Your word," he snapped, looking at each Sarka in turn, and each in his turn nodded. They had given their word, but not their love to Dalis. Dalis bowed low to Sarka the youngest, who darted to the onyx base in which revolved the Master Beryl, and pressed a small lever of metallized jade, set in a slot on the southern side of the base of onyx. The humming sound within the barrel became perceptibly louder, and as the minutes passed, and Sarka stood arms folded watching the revolving barrel, it continued to increase. Here was the crisis, and as they watched its sure, certain approach, they forgot their enmities, Dalis and the Sarkas, and watched the whirling barrel. Minute by minute its humming increased. The figures still were plain to be seen within the barrel, but were becoming blurred of outline. Partitions had been removed all over the earth, increasing the size of rooms 100-fold, reducing their number 100-fold. The Gens of Earth by 100 families were maneuvering under the heads of hundreds. The depth of the Master Beryl, therefore, was a maze of flying men, with their extremities slightly blurred, and becoming more so as the Master Beryl increased its speed. Here now was shown the value of the organization fostered by Sarka the First, for in all the world there was no single barrel out of tune with the Master Beryl. And as the Master Beryl increased the speed of its revolving, so increased at the same time the speed of all the other barrels. Minute by minute the humming of the Master, and with it the others, increased in volume. "Father," spoke Sarka, "to the observatory behind the barrel, please, to watch the stars, and from them to know the direction we take when the combined vibrations of the barrels have affected the quiescence of Earth to poses of Ovidum and, through its shifting, disturb the flight of the Earth in its orbit." With a brief nod, Sarka's father hurried around the Master Beryl to the tiny observatory beyond, from which, through the micro telescopes, those who knew could read the secrets of the planets, the stars, the universe. Sarka watched him go, wondering if Dalis might not forbid him, but Dalis merely watched him go and said nothing. Now that the time of change was upon the world, Dalis realized his responsibility. It was little wonder that he began to be for the first time a little bit afraid. "Note, Dalis," snapped Sarka, and Dalis started nervously as his name was spoken. "Feel the trembling of the laboratory, just as the same trembling affects all the other buildings in the world in which barrels are located. As the minutes pass the trembling will go deeper and deeper, and by tomorrow the first tremors will be reaching into the earth to several miles below the last habitable inner level, and then—" "Then," repeated Sarka tersely, "my father will know by his study of the stars in which new direction we are traveling. For within 24 hours the Earth will have started on its voyage of conquest." "Is there no way, Sarka," queried Dalis, "by which we can control the direction of our flight?" "There is a way, O wise and gallant Dalis, but since you don't know it—" "Who now is Master?" Dalis' face became as pale as chalk, and Sarka smiled a little as he watched him. Then, wondering what new resolve stirred the depths of this Master Egoist of the Earth, he watched emotions flash to and fro across the face of Dalis, watched the color return to his cheeks. The cold of death gripped at his heart when Dalis spoke. "I don't fear death, O wise and gallant Sarka," he mocked, "for I have lived fully and well, and for many, many centuries. You know that I don't fear to slay people of the Earth. For did I not propose to a father's father that a flood would be beneficial to unfit Earthlings? Here, then, keep your secret, and I shall allow the Earth to go outward into space, out of control, in whatever direction it will, if any other worlds happen to lie in our pathway." Dalis shrugged indifferently, turning his back on Sarka, to peer again into the depths of the Master Beryl, whose voice had risen to a vaster murmur, whose pictures were becoming moment by moment more blurred as time fled irrevocably into eternity. Sarka the First took advantage of his opportunity, and leaped at the back of Dalis, hands extended to fasten them in the throat of his ancient enemy. Dalis whirled with a burst of laughter, and the muzzle of his ray director covered the person of the first Sarka. In a flash the spot where Sarka the First had been was vacant, and there was no single sign to show that he had ever stood there. Silence then in the laboratory, save for the mounting murmur of the Master Beryl.